Hello everyone. And welcome to this audio podcast. This audio podcast is part of the hyphenate. This audio podcast is part of a school crisis and inspectorate. This audio podcast as part of the BRIC and Bash, and this audio podcast is part of a Storm Robotics production and Interlude. Through this audio podcast today, I look at an overview in around some works relating regarding decolonizing and diversifying transplant immunobiology through laboratory medicine and social media. So a bit of intro. So immunology, that is the immune system, or in around the study of the immune system, has a basis wherein homeostasis exists through a certain subset wherein pathophysiology is as self and a particular fraction of the rest of the immune system as foreign. Specifically, the immune system can be classified into four categories. Firstly, visible self, whether bodily structures to which the immune system is tolerant. Secondly, invisible self, which is bodily structures to which it is not tolerant, but to which it does, which it does not normally does not normally respond. Thirdly, visible non-self, where there are structures to which the immune system normally responds. And then fourthly, the invisible non-self, where there are non-immunogenic structures to which it does not respond. Excuse me. And now I look at T cell activation, allorecognition, and alloresponse in transplantation. So in self and non-self modalities, T cells must be sort of able to distinguish the difference between foreign and self antigens. In an immune system poised for danger, for example, T cells need only to identify antigen presenting cells, or APCs, from everything else. So particularly if any T cell specific antigen presenting cell antigen were omitted, and if APCs were the only cells able to activate T cells, the only T cells that are stimulated during an immune response would be those specific for new antigen presented by antigen presenting cells, or APCs. So initial recognition of processed antigen by T cells is through a T cell antigen receptor. Accessory molecules interlink with accessory molecules interlink antigen presenting cells and the T cells, thus leading to a stronger cell interaction or interlink. For example, CD4 T helper cells sort of bind to constant region domain of class 2 MHC major histocompatibility complex molecules, whilst CD8 CD8 or CD8 T cells, or cytotoxic T cells, for example, then bind to class 1 major histocompatibility MHC molecules. CD4 positive T cells can differentiate down to at least two pathways to become inflammatory T helper cells, for example, T helper type 1 cells or T helper type 2 cells, which assist B cells. T helper cells T helper cells type 1 are predominantly involved in mediating inflammatory immune responses through the activation of macrophages, whilst T helper type 2 cells are primarily involved in the sort of the introduction of humoral immunity through the activation of B cells. And T helper type 1 cells are also produce cytokines. cytokines that primarily act on macrophages, such as interferon gamma, and tumor necrosis factor, or TNF, tumor necrosis factor alpha, or TNF alpha, whilst T helper types 2 cells are involved mainly in B cell differentiation and maturation through for example, interleukins 4, interleukin 5, and interleukin 6. And now look at a little bit in around intracellular signaling pathways in T cell activation. So the lymphocyte endothelial interactions depend on the expression of appropriate target antigens on the endothelium. HLA or human leukocyte antigen class 1 antigens are constitutively expressed at the cell surface, whereas HLA human leukocyte antigen class 2 antigen expression must be induced by various cytokines, especially interferon gamma. Furthermore, adhesion molecules such as intracellular adhesion molecule and vascular adhesion molecule, ICAM and VCAM, respectively, integrins and selectins, which also play a crucial role amongst cell surface interactions between lymphocytes and endothelial cells and activation. Such molecules release of cytokines and inflammatory mediators. These processes lead to a migration of lymphocytes through the vascular wall, leading to inflammation. As part of this, Zebraxon Bash interlude, a look at aims and objectives. So the aims and objectives of here in around this is to provide a sort of an overview of chemokine and chemokine receptor expression in AAR, acute allograft rejection, in context of transplantation or solid organ transplantation and transplant immunobiology, and additionally, where the aims look to be met, highlighting how, for example, social media organizations such as the RPSG and CADARS have looked to encourage healthcare inclusivity, to bridge healthcare disparities and decolonize essential topics in transplant immunobiology and across laboratory practices to enhance PPI, or patient and public involvement. Continuing and now looking at the importance of interleukin and co-stimulation in transplantation. Laboratory investigations have informed in around human transplantation, excuse me, in around human transplantation or human solid organ transplantation, that there are alternative pathways that promote the development of pro-trafficking phenotype of T cells, that is, different forms of T cells, different types of T cells in recipients that have received, for example, CD25 pharmacotherapy. A retrospective hypothesis had been addressed using a T cell culture system to analyze the effects of anti-CD25 on the expression of chemokine receptor CXCR3 and other important chemokine receptors on the surface of T cells. In AAR, in context of transplant immunobiology, from the early millennia in around the early millennia of the early 2000s, there had been intrigue in surrounding most essential interleukins in transplantation, such as interleukin 2 and interleukin 15, which had been cited in several works. Interleukin 2, also known as T cell growth factor, or TGF, is secreted by stimulated T helper cells. For example, CD4 positive uncytotoxic T cells, or TC cells. For example, CD8, also referred to as CD8 positive cytotoxic T cells, and large and large granular lymphocytes. Interleukins also promote a proliferation, i.e. colonial expansion and differentiation of additional CD4 positive cells and CD4 positive cells, B cells, and activate macrophage and oligodendrocytes. So whilst the generation of new immunosuppressive agents are a merit of pharmaceutical industry and laboratory and amongst laboratory research or laboratory investigations. The understanding of basic mechanistics of the immune recognition and regulatory networks begins or have begun through disease processes in hospital laboratories. T cells can recognize and react against an allograft either directly the direct recognition pathway or indirectly through the indirect recognition pathway. And it had been demonstrated through laboratory investigations that both pathways mediate the growth and differentiation of alloantibody producing B cells that contribute to acute and chronic rejection. However, both pathways can be inhibited by subsets of specialized T cells which display regulatory and suppressor function. TR cells display a characteristic CD4 positive and CD25 positive phenotype and act as natural inhibitors of T cell reactivity to autoantigens. Now a quick look at transplantation and healthcare practices. So apart from co-stimulation and human transplantation, there have been works postulating an integral role of immune regulation for transplant tolerance identified across rodent laboratory investigations. The investigators had informed that tolerance in rodent laboratory investigations through rodent laboratory investigations, it can often be adaptively transferred where the sense of tolerance in rodent laboratory investigations can be adaptively transferred by lymphocytes from long-term survivors in naive secondary test recipients. Second, the maintenance of immunological tolerance requires persistence of donor antigen. Third, cellular infiltrates containing a large proportion of T cells can be frequently found in tolerant allografts. In some such cases, recipients are not prescribed IST or immunosuppression pharmacotherapy. Clinical immunobiologists have been searching for full explanation of tolerance over three decades, if not more, to help improve the acceptance of transplanted organs. Tolerance prevents or precludes the immune system from attacking self, and self-tolerance can be partly explained by the destruction of self tissue by T cells that react to self-antigens, but some self-reactive T cells slip through the destruction process, killing tissue in context of immunobiology. So convinced an antigen specific mechanism of tolerance exists, laboratory investigations had developed for a different set of T cells. These TR cells induce tolerance after recognizing the antigens on the surface on another type of immune cells. Or another type of immune cell, DCs or dendritic cells, which possess and present antigens to T cells, including TR cells, TH cells, and TC cells. After recognition, TR cells then rob dendritic cells or DC cells ability to activate the TH cells and TC cells to respond to the same antigen. Without active T helper and T killer cells, the immune response to the antigen is then placed on hold. The stress effects on the on immunity seem to be also mediated through endocrine factors such as hormones, neurotransmitters, excuse me, and neuropeptides that can interact with cellular components of the immune system, thus also priming the transplant for acceptance and/or tolerance by a recipient. Now looking at debunking and mentoring healthcare service users and providers. So although research has provided valuable insights into the ways patients or recipients use healthcare services, it is also important to appreciate insight into the type of stressors experienced by both patients and professionals. Owing to advances owing to healthcare advances, majority of recipients with long-standing conditions, for example, now have access to electronic patient records or healthcare records. Literature also informs that patients and professionals, healthcare service users, and healthcare providers have variations in digital and across, for example, healthcare and healthcare literacy skills, for example, and differences in attitude towards communicating with healthcare providers. So typically, patients or recipients can still have challenges regarding implication of laboratory and pathology investigations. So in context of debunking and mentoring healthcare service users and mentoring healthcare service users, answers to laboratory medicine based questions could be better supported, involving allied healthcare professionals and excuse me, and healthcare laboratory specialists from within laboratory medicine and pathology. In addition, healthcare laboratory specialists who can provide sort of real-time and evidence-based understanding between healthcare sectors is and would be advantageous. At present, addressing issues through professional collaborations is more constructive. To preclude disparities in healthcare, such as how EPRs are used, rather than how both online spaces and social media, for example, and EPRs, electronic patient records, together could become more important in context of addressing such aspects pertaining to health and illness. A quick look at discussion, and then looking at a conclusion. So one of the mechanisms in support of recipients and healthcare professionals take a greater intrigue surrounding the integrated aspects of scientific practices of solid organ transplantation has been implemented. These have included, for example, public health initiatives aimed at integrating shared decision making and co-development to increase the number of healthcare decisions where both patients and professionals patients and healthcare professionals are sort of co-develop or are in or sort of co-develop sort of practices or healthcare practices. Investigation in the role of chemokines or cytokines and the mediation of acute allograft rejection or AAR research is still challenging, primarily because of sort of the unsatisfactory nature of laboratory representations of AAR. However, social media platforms as space, for example, have importance and prompt inclusive healthcare practices and invite recipients and healthcare professionals and researchers to co-develop between academia and healthcare practices. As part of the conclusion, the importance of decolonization of immunobiological practices and laboratory medicine, including patient perspectives surrounding serological investigation, has not been conveyed within published works in any specific detail. To decolonize and diversify such healthcare and scientific themes surrounding evidence-based practices through social media, uh, uh, surrounding evidence-based practices through social media. Um, This should, however, implement and encourage PPI, laboratory medicine, and clinical practice alliances. And somewhat relating, social media organizations, RPSG and KDAS platforms have published works looking at CKD healthcare and educational themes or theme based works, which are most important which are most important or pertinent to recipients, to CKD recipients, but are also by way of bridging healthcare disparities and inequalities, and prompting more inclusive practices. Finally, it is important to recognize that healthcare professionals, academics, and recipients or patients have different motivations to challenge disparities when encouraging best practices surrounding healthcare. Patients vary in skills, or recipients vary in skills, knowledge, and confidence to approach healthcare. One example would be to envisage patients and professionals who are determined to co-develop and integrate healthcare services to also envisage quality collaborative efforts. Both RPSG and KDAS have prompted collaborative practices, highlighting the importance of professional patient and healthcare professional co-developing efforts. That draws this audio podcast to a close. This audio podcast is part of the Hyphenate. This audio podcast is part of the BRIX and Bash. This audio podcast is part of a Squall and Crisis Inspectorate. This audio podcast is part of an Interlude as part of a Storm Logistics production.